Hello everyone, today we will be talking about emotional development in peers in mid to late childhood. To start off with, in mid childhood we are talking about 7 to about 11-year-old children. So they're continuing to develop their emotional understanding and having the ability to understand complex emotions like pride or shame. And at this period, these emotions are more self-generated rather than instructed by parents or teachers talking them through those emotions. So we also see conditional understanding when they understand that they can experience more than one emotion in any given situation. And so when we work with kiddos, we talk about a type of double dip feelings in which you can have two feelings at one time. And so we provide an example like moving and starting a new school. How do you think kids would feel then? And so they may be excited to meet new kids, but also scared because they don't know anyone, and this is a new school. So we try to provide examples of that in talking about having two feelings at one time. So they start to actually understand the role of causality when they're aware of events leading to emotional reactions of others and also themselves. So one example of this is that they understand that they're sad today because their friend moved away last week, and it isn't just some emotion that just happened. So similar to what we talked about last week with emotional display rules, they're now fully able to suppress or conceal their emotions, typically for negative emotions. So an example of this is that they're able to tone down their anger or their frustration. So they're now also able to express and experience true empathy or genuine empathy. So this is where they feel sympathy for others and can vicariously feel the emotions for others, whether that's happy or sad. And at this period of time, children are developing an understanding of their self-worth or self-esteem, where they apply a global evaluation of whether they're good or bad, for example. So they also develop a self-concept of domain-specific concepts like academics, athletics, and social appearance. And really what that's talking about is their competency or their ability in each of those domains. And so their self-concept may look like, well, I'm a smart student, or I'm an intelligent girl, or I'm a great football star. So both build off the quality. What we see is that both of these really build off that quality of the parent-child interaction. So it really comes back to that parenting behavior and that relationship between parent and child. And so what we really see is that this is building off of those interactions built in infancy and early childhood. So high self-esteem typically stems from positive, sensitive parenting and secure attachments. So we also see that self-esteem or self-concept does not always match their reality. So it can go both ways. So low self-esteem when you're really actually good at something, or experiencing high self-esteem when you're not as good as you think you are. And so parents should always praise, right? So that's some kind of questions or former question that people may have in terms of what we see today. So we're seeing that parents are always praising kiddos' behavior even when they're not good at that task. So that's what we often see in today's society. So what we see is that kids actually feel good about themselves, but they're not performing even well on basic tasks. So keep in mind that too much of a good thing may be bad. So 3 other concepts in relation to the self include self-efficacy, which is the belief in their mastery, in which they have the capacity to produce favorable outcomes. So they believe that they can seek challenges, or that they can follow through and be successful. So I'm confident that I can climb a tree, or that I can make good grades on my homework. That would be a type of self-efficacy, just this belief or this confidence. So we also see self-regulation, and this is related to increased social competence as well as academic achievement. This is really due to that prefrontal cortex growth that we see throughout this period. So kids can manage their extreme emotions. They're more fun to hang around with, as opposed to the crazy kid who's mean all the time, cries all the time, and cuts the line. So you can really start to see why this is an example of kiddos with better self-regulation are better at having this type of social competence and making friends, because this encourages those peer interactions or positive peer interactions that we want to see. So this is also related to self-control, which significantly increases from about 10 to from 4 to 10 years. So controlling the ability to control these impulses. So with the development of self-regulation comes the development of more sophisticated moral reasoning. And that leads us to talking about Kohlberg's cognitive theory of moral development. And so Kohlberg actually refined and expanded Piaget's theory by assigning tasks to 10 to 16-year-old kids where they were asked to choose between obeying rules and ignoring regulatory forces and respond to the needs or the welfares of other people. And so you can start to think about in the previous chapters when we've talked about cognitive development and having more rigidity in their thinking versus understanding that rules may be applied in some situations but may have to be broken in some other cases. So one of these examples look like, is it okay for a husband whose wife's life is on the line, maybe she's dying of cancer, but he cannot pay for the drugs that would help her to feel better in the moment. So, for example, she's on chemotherapy, but she needs help with getting over the nausea that often accompanies chemotherapy. So is it okay for him to steal drugs to save her life or to make her feel better? And so based on this research, he actually theorized 3 broad levels and subdivided those into 6 categories. So stage 1 in development, children seek to avoid punishment, defer decision-making to powerful people, oftentimes their parents, and morality of an act is defined by the physical consequences of that act. So at stage 2, children conform to gain rewards, understand reciprocity and sharing, but this reciprocity is manipulative and self-serving for the kiddo. So it's almost kind of like kind of bartering or asking, what do I actually get out of this situation? So children believe that the appropriate action to that example is the one that's least likely to be punished. So their decisions are based on relative costs. So it would be bad if he got blamed for his wife's death. This would be their type of reasoning or explanation for it. It would be bad if he went to jail for stealing. So again, you're not seeing the overall picture of saving someone's life, but more so what would happen based on that decision. So their explanation is based on that they see all the norms as something that doesn't apply to them. Their self-interest is the main concern, and that the law doesn't matter to them. So in stage 3, a child's behavior is designed to maintain approval and good relations with other people. So they're concerned with others' approval or disapproval rather than physical power. In stage 4, kids blindly accept social conventions and rules. They believe that if the society accepts these rules, then they should be maintained to avoid censure. So they have an unquestioning acceptance of social regulations. And so during these stages, children are focused only on the law. They claim that they won't murder because they don't want to break the law, for example. So the husband shouldn't steal because it's against the law. So just straight and narrow type of thinking. And so values and practices like the following are actually further developed during this period. And so we start to see this impact of Kohlberg's moral reasoning and how that is impacted by pro-social development. So these include sharing, which is a more complex understanding of what is right and just, cooperation, and understanding that you can achieve more when you're cooperating with other people, even though it might cost you or the individual, like taking turns. So they have a more complex development of pro-social behaviors. They will help others in need, but typically not those who were previously unfair or antisocial. So as we talk about sex differences, remember that adaptive, healthy, pro-social behaviors are not extremes of behaviors, but a little bit of each. So you never want to be too extreme on the continuum of anything and everything that we talk about. So there are a few physical differences in pro-social development until puberty. So the source of these differences lie in prenatal hormone exposure, which organize the brain development as either not female, but more feminine versus masculine. So in terms of brain organization, females and males have relatively the same brain size, though males have more developed parietal lobes or for visuospatial skills, and females have more developed or complex areas for emotion expression in language and perceptual speed. And so the degree of difference lies in the socialization experiences of males and females. Taken together, prosocial behavior depends on both socialization and prenatal hormones or genes. So what we see within childhood is that activities reflect both male and female social styles. So for females, there are two social goals. They include developing and maintaining reciprocal relationships, because this is necessary for cooperation, and also we see the practicing and refining of skills necessary for relational aggression. They establish intimacy by being sensitive to the social and emotional cues of their friends. They work harder to resolve that conflict that may arise, and they have relationships that are more likely to permanently dissolve as a result of conflict if strict reciprocity of mutual gains and benefits are not maintained. So friendships come and go if they feel that they're putting more effort into the relationship, more so than the other person in that dyad or that relationship. So this functions to develop a core set of relationships that enable the maintenance of social, emotional, and interpersonal stability and interpersonal support in times of social conflict in adulthood. And so this is actually related to child outcomes. So in traditional societies, the children of women with more social support have fewer illnesses, have more social support themselves, and do better on a variety of measures. So we're starting to see there's a big amount or a large amount of evidence that actually shows that social support has various positive outcomes for individuals. And so switching gears to talking about peers in mid to late childhood, researchers have attempted to study peer relationships by evaluating how children rate their peers. So this led to the concept of the sociometric technique, which is a procedure for determining children's status within their peer group, in which children nominate others whom they like best or least, or even rate each child in the group for his or her likability or desirability as a companion. Investigators derive various measures of social status from these procedures. So children who are popular are children who are liked by many peers and disliked by very few. Average children have some friends, but are not as well liked as popular children. Controversial children are liked by many peers, but also disliked by many. Neglected children tend to be socially isolated, and though they have few friends, are not necessarily disliked by others. Rejected children, however, are disliked by many peers and liked by very few. There are actually two categories of rejected children. The first one is aggressive, and these are rejected children who are characterized by high levels of aggressive behavior, have low self-control, and exhibit behavior problems. We also see non-aggressive rejected children who tend to be withdrawn, anxious, and or socially unskilled. And so consequences of being unpopular can lead to both short-term and long-term problems. So unpopular children report feeling lonely and socially dissatisfied. Not surprising. So neglected children seem to be no more lonely than average children, but rejected children are especially likely to feel lonely. So moreover, non-aggressive rejected children feel lonelier than aggressive rejected children. And that makes sense because they're probably wanting to be friends or wanting to interact with other people, but don't actually have the social skills to make those connections. So the long-term consequences include children who are more likely to drop out of school and develop patterns of criminal activity and other than or more so than well-accepted children. So social standing tends to remain stable across the time, and actually we see it across different situations, especially among rejected children. So these kids develop a reputation for how people view them. So changing groups does not actually help these kiddos because people retain their rejected perspective of these kiddos in new groups. So how do we intervene as psychologists or within psychology? So we actually help children with peer problems by shaping socially desirable behaviors through reinforcement or the modeling or directing them, these kiddos, through coaching in social skills, which can increase their social acceptance by other peers and group members. And so parents can act as peer promoters because parents influence their children's peer relationships in a variety of ways, which can include they can help children acquire skills that help them to interact successfully with other children. They can act as coaches or educators for their children, and they can provide opportunities for positive peer interaction, like encouraging their involvement in extracurricular activities or setting up play dates with families that they know well. And so what we see in terms of kind of carrying on this idea of peer interactions and negative peer interactions specifically, we talk about bullying. And so bullying, what we see is that the primary function of bullying seems to be to gain a higher status in the peer group or to display their power. And it could be both as well. So boys and girls both bully, but they bully in different ways. And so we've talked about this before, and you've read about the types of aggression that we see in terms of sex differences across males and females. And so primarily what we see with boys is physical aggression, both physical and verbal, and we see relational for females. So interventions for bullying include improving peer relations by educating others on the bystander effect. So you're starting to see that, or integrating other fields of psychology such as social psychology to really understand why others behave in the way that they do and how to actually prevent that. And what we also want to educate kiddos on is to what they should do if they are in that situation, or they're maybe they're not a participant in the bullying or experiencing bullying, but seeing others bullying others, is to go and to tell an adult. And so also what we see is that we want to encourage and celebrate diversity of students and ability, ethnicity, religion, and all of these other type of minority populations, and implementing these school-wide with zero tolerance for bullying.